Now that you've joined the Ozark Farmers Network, it's really important to learn just exactly how we trade with each other. So I'm going to go over the user's guide on transactions and then show you on the site how it works. So we see here, this is very important. It's the seller who enters the transactions, not the buyer. The seller records trades. This seems counterintuitive at first, but if you think about it, it's the only way it can work. When sales take place, buyers neither give their sellers anything, nor are they obligated to them in any way. In other words, the buyer does not pay or owe the seller anything in the conventional sense. Payment is made by the buyer delivering something to someone else in the community at a later time. Buying sets up an obligation, and it's this that binds users together. A buyer with a positive credit balance indicates that the buyer has already paid for the purchase by delivering something to someone else at an earlier time. Next, the seller entering the transaction is also an acknowledgement that the exchange is not a bartering system where the trading relationship is directly between buyers and sellers. All transactions are indirect in that we pay for what we receive by doing or giving something to somebody else. Debits are not a promise to pay, as in the conventional money system, but a promise to sell. Trading is similar to trading with a credit or debit card in the conventional economy. When you present your groceries at the checkout of the supermarket, it's the supermarket, the sales assistant, that enters the transaction. Your credit or debit card is not money, it's just an ID. Swiping your card debits your account and credits the account of the supermarket. Imagine if it was the other way around. You, as the buyer, took your groceries home and the supermarket had to wait for you to enter the transaction through your internet banking account. That would never work. And the supermarket would have to employ an army of debt collectors chasing customers to enter their transactions. When you deposit a regular check at the bank, you're doing so as the seller. The bank teller enters the amount into the computer, which credits your account and debits the buyer's. The check is not money. It's just an order to the bank, authorizing the debiting of the buyer's account and the crediting of yours. Our trading slips perform the same function when they're handed by the seller to the administrator or coordinator. We'll get into trading slips and coordinators for offline transactions later. Anyway, the coordinator can enter the information into the computer on your behalf. Since there's no exchange medium in the exchange, all that needs to happen after a sale has taken place is that a record has to be made of it. There are three parties who could enter the details: the buyer, the seller, or a third party, such as the administrator. If the buyer were to do it, the details would likely never get entered because it's not in the interest of buyers to debit their own accounts. Sellers would have to remind their buyers to enter the transactions, and after a time they might even forget, resulting in what amounts to theft on the part of the buyer. Tardy transaction entering on the part of buyers would result in a lot of frustration for sellers. If buyers entered transactions, sellers would also have to send invoices to their buyers, creating an extra step that's not really necessary. If the seller does it, then it's in the interest of the seller to enter the transaction as quickly as possible, as it credits his or her account. If the seller never does it, then it's only the seller who's to blame. Even if the buyer benefits by not having his or her account debited, the buyer can never be accused of theft. When the seller enters transactions, there's no need to send an invoice to the buyer, unless a firm price couldn't be given before delivery of the goods or service. When the buyer approves or signs off delivery, the seller can enter the transaction and there's no need for any further correspondence. An enormous amount of time and effort is eliminated by not having to issue invoices. This speeds up settling of accounts, eliminates frustration and the need to chase debtors, and cuts out standing in bank queues. In the conventional economy, banks would never allow sellers to credit themselves. As the conventional banking system is so open to dishonesty, fraud, and corruption. In our exchange, on the other hand, dishonesty is much more difficult, so it's possible for sellers to directly credit their accounts. It's also a testimony of the trust inherent in our trading. Another reason why it's important that sellers enter the information is to create or preserve the sense of belonging, obligation, and community. When a buyer gives money to a seller, there's a feeling of completion after the goods or service have been delivered. The buyer's paid the seller and no longer has to think about it. This is why people living in well-off areas don't know their neighbors. They don't need them. Everything can be bought from anonymous suppliers outside the community. When sellers enter the transaction information, buyers are left feeling obligated to the community by the knowledge that they have to pay for what was received by selling something themselves. It's this feeling of obligation on the part of buyers and the knowledge by all that they need each other that creates community. Conventional money destroys it. All right, so now we are back on the trading account homepage. In the previous video, I covered the homepage with you. Today, we're just going to look at the Quick Actions menu on Seller's Actions. To enter a transaction, click here, and you've got some choices. Now, when it says Public Ledger Trading Functions, what that means is it's not public to the whole world. It's public to members of the exchange. And part of how we stay honest with each other is by allowing the members to take a look at our activity. If you just want to record a single transaction, this is the quick one. And this is if you know the trader's account number or to search for it. You click on that. Up here you see we're entering as a seller. Now here's where you could search. You could enter the name of the person that you have sold something to, or you could click here to see a list of names if you're not sure, and there'll be a drop-down list. Again, for privacy, I'm not going to be showing all of the names of our members. If you know their account number, you could enter it here. Enter a description of exactly what the transaction covers, and then the amount in ARCs. And then click Submit. Automatically, the seller will find that their account has been credited, and the buyer will find that their account has been debited. Now let's take a look at another option. This one provides a list, a drop-down list of all of the members, and that's just another way that you could search for the person that you're looking to record a transaction with. If you have a lot of transactions going on, you could click here. For this one, you would need to know the buyer's account number. All accounts start with the letters FARM. So their account number, a description, and the amount goes here. If you want to add rows, you could click on Go, and that would add rows. Then you just click Submit. Now you could, if something's more complicated and somewhere else you recorded transaction data that you wanted to upload to this particular transaction, you could do that here. Here you're uploading a text file. If you don't understand that, you could click here for more information on it. On that one, you could have entered a lot of transactions, by the way. To record remote transactions, this is where you may have sold something to someone in another exchange. So here's where you would put their network ID. Our network ID is FARM. Every exchange has its own network ID. And if you want to do search, you could there. And then their account number, description, all the rest of it's the same. When you are trading internationally, the conversion rates can be helpful. If you're trading with an exchange that has a different valuation from our ARC, which could be especially true in another country, this is where you can convert. So, for example, let's say I want to convert 30 ARCs to, and let's say to echoes. That's okay. So that's in Spain. 30 farm ARCs is the equivalent of 13 echoes, Terrablava, Mallorca, Spain. The final option for sellers is to send an invoice. This is generally unnecessary, but it could be helpful if there was some discussion between you and the buyer about what the price would be, and you finally agreed and you want to make sure that it is agreeable. So you would, in our exchange, the farm exchange, you would select your buyer here. That's a drop down menu, or you could put their account number. And if there's an order number, you could put that here, and then your description, what the units are, what the unit price is. And if you click here, you could send a copy to yourself. If there's a shipping cost, you could put that here. And to view the invoice, you would click that to see the invoice before you send it. It's for notification purposes only. It doesn't enter any information into the database. To credit yourself for your sales, use one of the transaction functions under Seller Actions on the home page. So this is just a notification to make sure everyone's in agreement. In our next video, we're going to look at what the buyer's actions are. Again, it's going to be on the quick actions list over here, so we'll go through that in detail. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments area, or you can email me, or in our Facebook group, ask away there. So happy trading, folks. I'll see you soon.